Andrew's taking a leak in the bathroom, so I thought I'd start without him.
Did you really?
Yeah. Did you wash your hands in there?
Public health, man. Public health first.
I'm gonna get another beer.
Did you really start?
I did. Yeah,
Oh,
we're live right now.
Intro. Have you introed it
No,
yet?
I didn't intro it. I
Oh,
wanted to
so
just
embarrassing.
start.
I'm sorry it took me 30 minutes.
Yeah, it was in here. I was like, I am so bored.
30
This-
minutes you're just talking.
What
dead
a
air.
what a bladder this guy has. What a bladder.
What a man. What
Somebody,
a bladder, what a man.
one of our mini fans stopped me on the street and he was like, "My favorite part of the show is one time you popped a beer open and you were like, that's the sound of me opening the beer."
That's the sound of emergency management. Hey, it's good to see you. It's been a while.
I know the world has changed
It
since
has.
we've recorded this podcast.
Have we done one since the election?
We have not. No.
Wow.
We've been in shock.
Well, let's not get political this
No.
soon.
No, you know why? Because Craig Fugate says disasters are apolitical.
That's right. We're going to talk about that tonight.
And we're going to talk about the future.
Craig Fugate, man, is he the best FEMA administrator we've ever had?
Yeah.
I think so.
Total fanboy. You know what I want? Somebody out there, write us in. Tell us what the W stands for in W. Craig Fugate.
Weather?
Oh, of course. Of course.
Worry? I feel like a FEMA administrator has to have worry in this. Like, worry. My middle name is Worry.
Actually, it's his first name.
So we're Facebook Living this one, and we have a total of standby 0 viewers.
Yeah, that's because I just turned mine off.
It says 14 people reached, but no people are currently watching.
Yeah, it's because they didn't want to watch. Yeah, it reached 4 people, and they all decided not to watch.
Yeah, they're like, that's
No,
partly
but
because we ran it for like 20 minutes while we were just researching,
Right,
cramming
right.
on
That's
what we're
right.
talking about tonight. Unfortunately, no guests tonight, so you have to listen to just us talk. But that's
it's
okay.
it's good because we need to talk about something important to all of our listeners out there. We need to talk about the future.
The future.
The future.
Mitch.
Roads? Well, we're going. We don't need roads.
Or we could talk about this future. That's the future featuring Drake.
Oh, I see. I
You
don't
don't
even
listen to the future.
I don't even get that. I don't have teenage daughters yet, so
Right. Thanks.
I don't know Drake.
So we're going to talk about the future in 4 segments. So the future of emergency management, where we're going, where the crazy world is going to be when we all retire. So we're going to talk about technology. Then we're going to talk about emergency management policy and politics. We're going to talk about the community. Are you really you're
I'm saying
asleep already?
Anytime someone says policy,
Oh,
but actually this will be an interesting.
we just shouldn't say policy. Let's just call it W.
All right.
And then finally future threats. That'll wake you up.
Yeah, that'll be good.
All the things that will kill us in the future.
That's right. And there are plenty.
Yeah. There are one or two. The great thing about talking about the future, for our first segment, you know what we get to talk about?
Drones.
I know.
The old standby. The old favorite. Yeah, so drones. Where to start? I don't know.
Here's what I was reading on the Amazon. Is that I was.
On the Amazon.com or in the Amazon or.
I was actually in the Amazon reading about Amazon
Wow.
on an Amazon device, and it turns out Amazon had figured out how to license one person piloting 20 drones at the same time.
What? That does not seem.
In their
safe.
delivery system, somehow one pilot is piloting 20 drones simultaneously.
Is that for real, or is that just Is this a marketing?
It was something like this. At least this is how it works in my imagination. It's like I'm here. I have my eyes closed. There are 20 screens in front of me, and like 10 of them are just like waiting for toilet paper or razors or whatever, and one is actually flying, and then a couple are like floating in front of people's doors or something. So they're
With
not
razor
all.
blades
That's right.
Spinning.
Yeah.
Shooting into the door.
And we're on future threats, just like that.
I mean, the thing that. I keep saying I'm really trying to rid myself of saying Have you
You could
noticed
say
that
instead.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
just
true.
say
Well,
That's all. What all the
has
good.
replaced as like the thing to say for filler. Everybody's if you stop and listen to how many people say when they're saying something, it's crazy.
You could say stuff.
The thing about drones that I see as a barrier is the cost of them, either if you're going to buy them, if your agency is going to buy them, or use consultants or a contractor to run them, and then just the regulation around them and getting approval, especially in dense urban areas like New York City. It's just almost impossible to get, approval to fly these things.
What's amazing to me is the FAA started putting out waivers, but so far, to my knowledge, there haven't been emergency response waivers. They're like corporate. They're like for filming. They might be for flyovers during disaster areas, but they're all corporate. They're not public service waivers. They're getting cheaper. I was imagining, I feel like in 20 years, we're kicking back in the EOC, right? And a disaster happens, and everybody that's in a watch command position puts on their goggles, and then they all like X-Men style. The drones just like rise up often, and they just go out doing situational assessment.
Plug in like the Matrix, the thing inserts to the back of your skull, and then you're just controlling them with your mind.
It's gonna be that's creepy, but that's probably what it's gonna be.
That would be neat. The other piece of them, I don't know if a drone, even the high definition cameras, the amazing things that they can do, would ever replace an experienced engineer on the site. Like if you're thinking damage assessment, I don't know if a drone could ever replace that knowledge that an engineer just getting there on site could do. So I do think there's limitations in them.
What if they were tiny robots? What if you were controlling a drone that had like a dozen tiny robots on it that could all jump off and...
That would be great, but maybe that's a segue into our final segment of the future. 'Cause I just don't think that's there now.
Yeah, that's true.
And also, I think one of the regulations they have in most places is line of sight. Like the operator has to be line of sight in the drone. So if you're that close anyway,
right?
Like,
why don't you just walk over there?
It kind of defeats the purpose of sending a drone.
No, that's true.
But
that's true.
I am not anti-drone. I'm not an anti-droneite.
No, you're pro-drone.
I'm pro-drone. I want them. I need them. I would love an army of them.
I was thinking about it though, because emergency management is a small field, right? It's not huge, which is probably why nobody's watching our Facebook Live feed right now.
Right.
But in the future, in talking about technology, do you think that drones, robots, that kind of thing will take away the limited emergency management jobs there are if we're doing these things? You know?
Yeah, well, I certainly don't see how they could take away planning, training, exercise, those core elements. Where I do think it could have use is in some field response, like especially in public health. Like say you're going into these remote areas and you want to deliver vaccines or medicine. I mean, can you see sending out an army of drones to deliver those things and come back?
That's actually great. And in Africa, there have been very limited tests with something like that. I think that's probably a best case use scenario for them. One thing, talking about public health, that is on the horizon in terms of technology are predictive modeling for pandemics. So one of my favorite documents is the Strategic Foresight Initiative that FEMA did in 2012 called Crisis Response 2030. And so one of the new tools they call out are like pandemic sensors. So there's these things like Google Flu Trends is one. There is modeling at Columbia, at some other universities, Johns Hopkins, that are building models to predict pandemics. And it's not there yet. And I'm skeptical of them, right? Like 10 years ago, they were not worthwhile. But like with Ebola, they were getting closer.
Right.
So, I mean, I can see a future where you can really, when somebody coughs in Peoria, that it'll show you how the pandemic wave will sweep over and kill us all.
Effect. I mean, that would be amazing if you could get them to the level of like weather forecasting and how those predictive models to at least give you yet some pre-warning, for these pandemic waves that are coming. I mean, hopefully we'll never have pandemics that move as fast as a tropical storm coming up the coast, but it's possible.
But we could all be watching, like all the emergency managers could be obsessively watching the pandemic coming closer and closer.
In our bunkers.
Yeah, here's the weather report every day.
Those fools upstairs. I actually watched a very scary lecture by a University of Minnesota professor. Man, I wish I could pull it up. But about pandemics and how just stuff we know, but in the 1800s, the fastest you could get across the world was like a year, and now it's almost, a little less than a day. And so just the speed at which diseases can travel, plus the huge urban, dense population areas and, places that you have disease spreading really, really easy. It's pretty terrifying.
$10. It was Michael Osterholm.
That's who it was.
And
That's who it was.
He just wrote an op-ed, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal,
Yeah.
saying that pandemics could kill more people than nuclear weapons.
Yeah,
and
the billions.
That's right, and that's why you should not cut the CDC budget, because more people are going to die in the
really
pandemic.
Funny you knew, yeah, that's who it was. He just wrote a book too. We should plug his book.
All right.
That just came out.
We'll get him on the podcast. Maybe he
knows.
knows what the W stands for.
Sure.
The thing about modeling, and I think
about models.
That's right.
Mitch, keep it to emergency.
Oh,
management.
right.
Modeling.
No,
Modeling.
sorry, my brain just totally froze there.
You're in modeling.
Because I wanted to talk about cascading models, and I was like, somewhere there's a pun, and I can't figure out what it is. Because the thing models always break on is you're modeling a situation, but then the situation always takes a crazy left turn. And the models always stop there. So like if power is out at a neighborhood and another generator breaks, another substation breaks, suddenly the problem gets bigger and bigger, but the model doesn't accelerate like that, you know?
Right.
So you have to develop models with the ability to comprehend that level of chaos. Yeah. That's the kind of next-gen modeling we need to be able to really do pandemic modeling in a real way.
But something that just even gives us, like, you think of the forecast modeling in the Northeast blizzard that we had 2 weeks ago, it wasn't that accurate in the end, but at least gave us some sense of something is coming. It could be this much snow. It'll be at least this much. So it kind of gave us some order of magnitude. Now I just feel like we're flying so blind when it comes to these novel viruses. Which
is one thing that's a little creepy to me about future tech for emergency management is the level of information. One thing the Strategic Foresight Initiative talked about is the universal access to information. Like in 20 years, everybody's going to know everything, which is great for exactly what you're talking about. But it also means everybody will know everything. And I'm really worried that we could face a scenario where in an emergency, the government, the emergency management industry will take on all this surveillance power, and then they won't give it back, at the end of the disaster.
That's interesting. The other side of that, though, is although there's more information available, I feel like people are more skeptical of information.
Right.
So even if you have facts like, vaccines prevent diseases, you have a whole host of people saying, nope, not true, I don't believe that. So even though the information is available, it's like it almost doesn't matter because you're still going to have to fight that fight of convincing people and changing behavior.
Yeah, can you believe that we didn't even know what alternative facts were like 3 months ago?
We were so young, so naive. Remember that 3 months ago?
It was that's right. We were babies, babies.
It is a crazy world in that regard, that it's not just about proving something is true. That really doesn't matter anymore. It's about convincing, I guess. But at the end of the day, you're not going to convince people about everything.
I think there's this professor, I think Lasner is her last name. No. $10. Yeah, he writes about everything. But this was about nuclear explosions, and it was about sheltering in place, right? The thing you can do to survive a nuclear explosion is you shelter in place for like 48 to 72 hours. So she did a study, and she found that maybe 60% of people will shelter in place, and the other 40% will just refuse to because they'll want to get to their kids, or they would just rather be at home, and so they'll go home even if they're going to get covered in radioactive material, or they just are not going to believe the government. Like even if they see an explosion happen, they will believe it's like a fake moon landing.
Oh my gosh.
That's
not a mushroom cloud.
It's just a tasty mushroom. It's a truffle.
Gosh.
And I guess the last tech thing that I wanted to hit on is there is this way that there's going to be less stuff. Like right now, I feel like emergency management has lots of stuff. Like we all got all this money. Everybody bought tanks or drones or whatever. Tank drones,
yes.
Little lasers, sharks with freaking laser beams coming out of their eyes. But in the future, we're not going to have money for that kind of redundancy. So we're going to really need to build some kind of sharing infrastructure, some kind of technological way that like you get to borrow my tank and I get to borrow your tank, and everybody, EMAC has to sort of get much more advanced than it does right now.
I think that's emergency management is positioned well for that. I'm questioning this as I say it, but I do feel like for the most part, especially during emergencies, we have processes set up to share information. We have processes set up to share resources. Just by nature of having an EOC, working in the EOC, the local, state, federal model of requesting resources, we do a fairly good job of sharing that stuff. So, hopefully we're a little more positioned than maybe better positioned than other industries that haven't had that practice.
Do we share and care? That's my question.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Never considered the future, poor Martin. God rest his soul.
Sure, and I hope you're considering the future, Mr. Eastwood.
I think about it all the time.
Is that from Titanic?
No, that's
Leonardo DiCaprio?
I recognize his voice everywhere.
that's Back to the Future 3.
Oh, right.
But it's
that
still,
was my second.
No,
guess.
because those were like legit the two worst Irish accents ever put on film. One being Leonardo DiCaprio, and the other one being
Michael J. Fox.
Michael J. Fox in Back
Past
to the Future 3.
Michael J. Fox. Yeah.
Past future Michael J. Fox.
The coolest part about that movie was when the train turned into the flying machine.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool.
No, that was pretty badass. I think that might be future emergency management technology. You think we'll have a flying train?
I hope so. Man, I hope so. But speaking of cool and badass, now let's talk about EM policy and politics.
Did I snore? Was that a
You
good
did.
snore?
That
Because
was
I got to
very
work on
loud
this.
in my
Okay.
ear.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what we want to talk about at this point. So, disaster relief fund for the states, territories only. Also, tribes.
Here's the thing. This is my rant.
Yeah.
Okay. The disaster relief fund. One of the top 3 most important things that I feel like the federal government has ever done, really, because it's this slush fund for when a state or territory or local has a disaster, the feds can step in and help them, which is one of the 3 reasons the federal government was created in the first place.
Right. We got money, this pool of money ready to go.
Right. And one of the best policy proposals of the new administration is to create a fund like that for public health emergencies too, because there isn't one right now.
Good.
But the thing about it is, and W. Craig brought this up, and also a couple of the other folks that were doing testimony about the future of FEMA in February were bringing it up, that what happens is other federal departments keep trying to get that money. They're like, if there's wildfire, maybe we can have some of this disaster relief fund to pay for our wildfire operations, and we've got to nip that in the bud.
Right. I mean, I feel for the wildfire guys because certain years they're just devastated by it, right? Like they run through their funding within the first month or two. But I think that happened to California last year. But yeah, it's tough because other disasters will be coming down the road, and so can we keep wildfires separate than other disasters? That's tough.
And if it's a state that's asking for wildfire support, awesome, great. The question is, if it's like the Federal Park Service that wants the money, that's who we've got to keep their grubbing federal hands.
So you're
off
saying
of it.
other federal agencies are seeing this pot of money that's set aside and said, "Hey, let us use that instead of just sitting there." In this pot, let us use that.
Right, the Department of the Interior wants it, or the Park Service, they want the disaster relief fund.
And then is the idea that if a big disaster happens, they would pay back into that fund, or it's just?
I don't know, man. I don't see that. I don't see that happening, but maybe it's possible.
Right, how would they?
Here's the thing I'm worried about in the future, along with that, which is that emergency management. I'm an old school. Quarantelli fan, old school disasters, 1950s, 1960s, all this great stuff. And it's I'm one of the 5 people that geek out about 1950s disaster research.
That's why you're wearing a seersucker suit right now.
That's right. And I only drink mint juleps and wear little fedoras.
Yes.
But in 2001, after 9/11, all of that changed to this security focus, right? Homeland security became a thing. Yeah. Emergency management became equated with TSA and all of this kind of stuff. And after Katrina, we got away from that. And I think now we've built up this good emergency management infrastructure. I don't want to see it all become about security and immigration anymore, because I think that can weaken emergency management the way it did in 2002, 2003.
Yeah, it seems to be this swing that kind of goes back and forth with Democrat or Republican presidents, right? Where's the emphasis, either in natural disaster prevention or homeland security, terrorism preparedness? And the answer is probably somewhere in the middle, or a swing that goes back and forth. Are you not picking up on that?
I don't know. I'm worried about your mic.
1, 2, oh,
there it is.
There
it is. Oh.
I think we got to shorten the wire.
Oh, okay. Hold on.
Okay.
All
we're
right.
back.
All right.
We had a problem with my mic.
I know. I'm hoping it wasn't a long-term problem.
Yeah,
We're not going to know.
We
This is the thing.
We're not starting this over. That's for sure. It's already like 2:30 in the morning.
Andrew's in the bathroom taking a leak, and I figured
And take 2. Here we
it's
go.
the Groundhog Day episode.
What were we talking about? The swing back and forth between security funding and natural disaster funding. And the truth is, both are very important.
That's right.
Both affect our nation, and so there does need to be a balance there. I don't necessarily know if there's a problem when it does swing one direction or the other, because both are preparing us for disasters, and there's enough commonalities between preparing for a terrorism event and a natural disaster. You always need to have information go to the right people. You always got to, practice logistics and move resources around. So there's enough common elements to the response of both of those that I think it's beneficial. You never want to go totally in one direction, right?
I'll buy that. I mean, it's capability-based planning, right? That's what you're trying to do. Mm-hmm. I guess I'm enough of a lefty communist to just to say when it goes farther into the security areas, you start talking about intelligence, you start walling off information in some cases, and those silos can be detrimental to other kinds of sort of non-secure responses.
Yeah, that's right.
But I think either way, you bring up this idea of partisanship, right? And why disasters have to stay as nonpartisan as possible.
Yeah, is that possible? I don't know. I think
so.
Since 9/11, politicians have it figured out. They know that as soon as a disaster happens, get there to the scene. I mean, you get national coverage. I think they're always going to be a part of it, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, with high power politician brings motivation, it brings proactiveness, it brings a lot of times funding and resources. So, emergency managers can leverage that.
When do you remember after Sandy when Chris Christie hugged Obama?
Yeah.
The hug heard around the world.
That's right.
I was actually like...
As he actually crushed Obama.
It was like a bone-crushing hug. Obama was in the hospital for 3 days with kidney failure.
Right.
But I was like so happy when
loved
it happened.
It was great. Yes.
I was like, this is the shit. And then he got hell. He just caught hell for it.
Yeah.
But I think that's what you need is after disaster, you need to have like some love. You need to have a period of like 100 days where everybody just focuses on helping the survivors.
Yeah, and I think emergency managers can help bridge that gap. I mean, we live in a society now that is so divided politically, and emergency managers can really bring together communities, bring together society in that regard of, you may be a Republican or a conservative emergency manager in a liberal state, and, that's your boss. You still have to deal with that, and you can deal with that in a respectful way or vice versa.
And what's interesting about leadership in crisis, right? There's a great book called Crisis Leadership that I forget the name, but we'll put it on the website. That talks about the 5 things you need as a leader in a crisis in order to make sense of it, to communicate effectively, effective decision making. And these are nonpartisan leadership skills that you need. And so it really ought to be something where everybody can come together and everybody can make the response happen.
Not to brag on our boy Craig again, but this is one thing.
We're such brown nosers. We're like,
such an amazing,
oh my God.
It's not brown nosing anymore. He doesn't run FEMA anymore.
Okay,
so
that's
we can.
Fair. That's fair.
But I don't know if he's Republican or Democrat. He served under Jeb Bush in Florida. He served under Obama at FEMA. And you don't know his politics. And I love that about him. Mm-hmm. Like he worked, under both parties, and he did an amazing job. Like that's what we need to aspire to be, man. Craig, follow Craig's example.
We actually are.
I'm gonna be so embarrassed if I ever meet him.
We're wearing little medallions right now with like Saint Fugate on them.
We have Craig Fugate masks on.
We're gonna get matching tattoos. It's gonna be
too
amazing.
late.
But I mean, one of the things about policy and politics, don't snore, is that in the future, federal funding is going to go down. That I think we have to just say federal funding is going to go down for emergency management stuff. I'm laying that out. And I think it's going to be very important that local governments recognize the value of emergency management, that they start doing funding. So I'm a big fan of federal grants that have specific dollar matching capabilities for locals, because what I've found is when local funding is on the line, local officials have much more skin in the game. Like that's where people really will. If you're spending federal dollars, they're like, okay, whatever, it's cool, man. But if you're spending local money, they're like, what are you doing? I want to be involved in that exercise. Right. And suddenly, like, it is on.
Attention on it. Now, why do you think that funding will go down in the future?
I guess I think that there's a limited amount of money in the federal government. I think that if we're moving towards a security focus, that classically what happens is some of that comes out of the emergency management pool. Not the Homeland Security stuff, but sort of the classic preparedness cycle.
The planning, the training.
Right. Maybe the public health side, maybe the hospital funding.
Evaluation.
The stuff that's the softer, fluffier stuff, I think, might get hit more.
That's interesting. And do you think it'll go down just within the next 4 or 8 years? Or, like, do you think it's an administration thing or a long-term trend? It's always going to go down.
That is so hard to say, right? I mean, I think that...
Well, the other thing, too, while you think about that is...
if you can let me think about that for a long time.
20 minutes later. Yeah. As if we're doing a great job as emergency managers and preparing our communities for disasters, helping them recover faster from disasters, there's a chance that funding could go down as a result of that, right?
You
guys are doing a great job.
That's right. We're going to take all your money away.
You've been doing great.
That's the classic bureaucratic response.
We're going to take it down.
Yeah. I think that's right. I guess I think... I still don't have an answer. Just come back to me at the end of the show. No, okay. Here's what I think. Okay. I think that...
I just hope it doesn't go down. Is what I understand, like, year by year, maybe it'll go down, but surely over time, eventually it'll continue to go up.
Mm-hmm. I think is that we are looking at a whole new set of capabilities that are coming online in the future, right? Which is the cyber stuff that we'll talk about some more. The other kind of tech stuff, things like the drones or walls, all kinds of walls. I wasn't
big walls,
even trying.
Big walls, high walls, strong walls, electronic walls. We got them all. Walls.
I don't know what I was saying. So
a lot of the technology coming
all that
out.
Stuff. And I feel like a lot of the funding is going to get diffused into those areas. And so this core collaborative capability, like the reason emergency management is a field in the first place is because after every disaster, people woke up after 2 days and they were like, wow, nobody's coordinating all this stuff.
Yeah.
And that's hard to focus on with the shiny stuff.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm worried.
That's hard. It is the danger. I mean, it's always easy to get money for the cool toys, the novel things. And a lot of times that maybe doesn't help prepare a community as much as, investing in evaluating and figuring out how to learn from mistakes and apply those lessons. It's that soft stuff that could really enhance resilience.
I really credit FEMA. One of the things that they've done in the last few years is they've done a pilot about public assistance funding that you can read about. I forget the name of it, but they're changing the way they give out public assistance because for a long time it's been structured to try and prevent fraud. So there are like 50,000 hoops you've got to jump through to get any money. And they're streamlining that because the truth is most people don't commit fraud after disaster, right? And people are behaving honestly most of the time. And so this new pilot takes that into account and gets money to people faster. I think that the thing emergency management needs to do policy-wise is to stop assuming everybody will commit fraud and start streamlining, going more towards just-in-time infrastructure, so they're not keeping big pallets of stuff around, but they're able to source it quickly in emergency. Those kind of policy changes will let the emergency management infrastructure operate faster and cheaper, but I think better at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first lessons... I said I mean again. Can you just slap me every time I say
Can I really? I'm excited about that. New game. All right, I'm on it.
See, now I'm thinking too much about my thoughts. I'm like, the thing about... The first lesson I learned in emergency management was all disasters are local. And so it makes sense that funding would be local and would be quicker, it'd be able to be implemented faster if that funding was coming from the local level. So
I didn't hear anything you said because
you're listening for
I'm just listening for I mean.
That one didn't count.
No, I think that's right. I mean, that's part of the thing. Do you want to say the Craig quote? Do you want to have the honor of saying the Craig quote?
Let me... So the thing that Craig said in his testimony, one of his last testimonies for Congress, he said, go big, go fast, go early, and be smart. That's what FEMA does now, and he wants FEMA to continue to do that. And I think that's a great model for for emergency management agencies. And I think we've gotten to that level, but we need to maintain that.
No, I think that's really key. And the thing about emergency management, it's so important that FEMA stays a cabinet level agency, stays advising the president directly, whoever the president is, so that in an emergency, that operational function is like right there next to the seat of power.
Yeah.
And I think that's what allows them to lean forward. So the worst thing that could happen from a policy perspective is to break that up, not have a powerful FEMA administrator to let that capability go.
I read another quote by Craig that said, he was talking about the next FEMA administrator, and he said, that person needs to be bent toward proactiveness. And I got to think about that element in emergency management as a discipline. Do you think it's easier in emergency management to be non-proactive, to be reactive? I mean, do you think just the nature of the business is like, wait till a disaster happens and then react? Mm-hmm. Because I think that is a huge challenge as emergency managers. We should be proactive in non-disaster times, and it's hard to do that, right?
Yeah.
And how do we help how as an emergency manager do you be more proactive during these non-crisis times? Actually,
this is my favorite book, which nobody listening should ever read, about emergency management, because it's so boring, but it's so useful. I actually have it right here.
Oh, wow.
It's by this guy, Thomas Drabek.
Oh, Drabek.
Yeah, good old Drabek. It's called...
Hold it up for the Facebook Live people.
That's right. It's called Strategies for Maintaining Organizational Integrity.
I think I just fell asleep.
I know, right? Isn't that? It's the best title. But what it has is 15 strategies that emergency managers have to use to do exactly what you're saying. Which is to be proactive in day-to-day work so they can be proactive in emergencies. And what it says is new emergency managers who are like ex-military tend to be really reactive. And it takes people like 7 or 8 years in the field before they realize that to be good at what they do, they have to reach out. And it turns out to run a successful response, the factors that actually matter are, have you helped other agencies to get money? Have you had joint trainings and exercises, which we know? Have you done a joint venture with other agencies? Even if it's not emergency-based, even if you did a bake sale, it totally counts. And then are you members of your local community service organizations? Like, are you a member of the Red Cross? Or do you go to the Kiwanis Club? That kind of stuff is what actually makes responses better.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's such a relational discipline that the more local relationships you have, the easier you can depend on those in an emergency.
Hey Doc! Where you going now? Back to the future?
Nope. Already been there.
What did he say?
He said he's already been there.
Oh,
because it's irony.
Doc.
Yeah.
I've already been there, you idiot.
You idiot.
Marty.
You bastard. I know. Marty McFly, he's kind of an idiot. I think.
How dare you?
I know, right?
How dare you?
We're going to get a hate mail for that right there.
Seriously.
Yeah. My wife is going to send us hate mail, actually, because he's a Canadian hero.
Okay, well, let's talk about the future then.
Yep. Good.
The future threats. So first thing we discussed before this was fusion centers. So fusion centers came online roughly after 9/11 as a central places throughout the country where information intelligence primarily would come in and then be disseminated to law enforcement agencies who could act on that information. I guess the problem I have with them is, as someone who's an emergency manager for a non-law enforcement agency, a lot of times I don't see the benefit or any of that information coming to me. Or when I do see it, I pick it up through just the local media, not necessarily through a fusion center. And that may be because I don't have a security clearance, I'm not law enforcement. There could be a host of valid reasons why these fusion centers don't go into non-law enforcement agencies. What's your experience with them, man?
I can't really speak to them now, but in Florida, when I went to the fusion center under Craig Fugate,
my boy,
it all just keeps cycling back around. I remember having a seat there when the mission was expansive, when the Fusion Center was really talking about connecting intelligence of all kinds to different agencies, and it was sort of flexible and everybody was just sharing everything they knew, it was really helpful.
And these were both non-law enforcement agencies and law enforcement?
Yeah, at the time at the Florida Fusion Centers, the health department had a seat to talk about pandemics, transportation had a seat, all the different capabilities had a seat. And basically, you had a lot of smart people in a room, and they were saying, "Here's what I'm worried about. Here's the data I've got," and that was really helpful.
Oh wow!
But I think
that would be amazing,
right? And I think what you need though is you need to redefine what a fusion center is, to make it really about sharing data, information, and wisdom really between all of these groups. Based on all the latest information they've got. That's the new model that we need.
And so you would somewhat take it out of the intelligence world, where maybe that would be a stream of data coming in, but you would also have non-law enforcement seats there.
Well, this is the interesting thing about NIMS. In NIMS, which is another, I guess, Snorefest, right? But the intelligence and investigation section in the National Incident Management System isn't about law enforcement intelligence only. It mentions epidemiology. It mentions, I think, vulnerability, community awareness. All that stuff is part of what you need to make good decisions.
Well, and if you look at the real intelligence agencies, that's what they're doing, right? They're doing intelligence gathering overseas, like the CIA, and they're putting together all these bits of information to try to paint a picture of what these countries or rogue agents are doing. It's almost that model, but applied at a local level.
Yeah, and I think in the future, to look at these threats, to compare intelligence, you've got to really dissolve that law enforcement, non-law enforcement barrier, right? You've got to, everything is context, everything's important. You've got to be able to throw everything in the pot in some way,
Yeah, the challenge, though, is the more people you tell about this stuff, the easier it is to get out. So I understand the secrecy in the walls,
that makes sense.
But it's got to be a balance somehow.
And a lot of the stuff, one of the things I think that would be most helpful to the emergency management industry would be a structure, a definition of what classified information really means. Because right now, there are like 15 different definitions of what classified means. The military does it different than the CIA, does it different than Homeland Security. Having one threshold that everybody agrees on would be so helpful in terms of being able to say what isn't classified, so that we could look at that. Because in a lot of cases, that's all you need. You don't really need the sources and methods stuff for this.
So what do you think about THIRIS? Threat, hazard, I forgot what incident?
Identification,
risk assessment.
I hate it. I think it should be killed.
Now, why?
I really do.
Now, first of all, what's the difference between a THIRA and a risk assessment?
I don't know. Well, okay.
Like, when you say you hate THIRAs, are you saying you hate risk assessments?
I hate all risk assessments. I never want to assess risk. Here's what I think.
Surely not.
I think that so that what THIRA is trying to do, and I think it's a great goal, is it's trying to identify the top threats and hazards that are coming into a jurisdiction, and then to assess the risk of those hazards, because a hazard isn't the risk, right? A big rock drops. If it drops in the middle of nowhere, it doesn't. It has to drop somewhere. That's where the risk comes in.
And if it drops in the forest and no one's around, did it really happen?
Yeah. Have you seen Dear Evan Hansen?
That was so stupid. I'm just going to leave, guys.
It hurts the trees. To the trees, that would rank in the THIRA.
That's true.
So the reason I don't like the THIRA is because I feel like it ties the hands of jurisdictions as to how they assess, and it doesn't use the new methods, that the modeling stuff we've talked about, the pandemic stuff, all the new data about how you do hazard and vulnerability assessments. None of that is in the THIRA yet. So I don't actually want to kill the THIRA. I just want to update. To me, the THIRA is like Microsoft Word in 1993.
Yeah.
That's where it is. And I feel like you could reboot it and really get much more innovative use out of it now.
The problem with these things, like doing a functional exercise or a tabletop exercise or a THIRA, is the more you do them, the more the tendency is to just kind of repeat what you did last year and not really. It's almost like every 3 years, FEMA just needs to blow up the process of doing it, completely reinvent it, and make everyone go through this new method,
which everybody would hate.
But
it would wake everybody up.
Yeah,
right? Everybody would be like, "Oh crap!"
Like I would hate that.
That's
if
right.
they did it, but it would probably be pretty good.
So fair warning, FEMA, we would hate it, but it would be good for us.
Right? Just give us more money if you make us do a new thing.
That's right. Maybe do it. We'll do it in Aruba. Just say we all have to go there.
So you don't really want to blow up the thyroid process. You just want to incorporate these new analysis
Here's
methods.
the other thing is that, right, the fake thing about the thyroid is that it focuses you on threats and hazards when really what you're trying to do is build capabilities. So the glowing cube that I would like, right, is so you have to imagine this big wall in front of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in front of us we have all of these capabilities we need to build as a jurisdiction. All right. So then you want to know, well, here are all the hazards. So when you have those hazards, what capabilities do they trigger?
Yeah.
So nuclear explosion triggered debris management, pandemics trigger healthcare, and what are they? So what you want to do is have a thyroid that maps to those capabilities so that you can figure out which are the capabilities that you need to plan for and develop. And so the more clearly you can do that and the more flexibly you can execute that, I think the better off you're going to be.
So you're saying now the thyroid is just separate from the capabilities. You go through this process and all you're left with at the end of the day is this is my top threat, this is my top risk.
Right. And
not what do I need to do to prepare for
that's
those.
right. And there's some lip service. I mean, it has like, in this threat, here's what we do, and we do this, and we do this. But I feel like what you've got to do is flip it. People always want to do thyroids because like risks are like sexier, right? It's like much more interesting to talk about, nuclear mushroom clouds than it is to talk about debris
12
management
inches of snow
capabilities.
or something like
That's
that.
right.
Yeah.
So, but you got to get to the capabilities for it to be meaningful.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that.
Which brings us essentially to Ted Koppel.
Ted Koppel. Did you see him take it to Sean Hannity the other night?
No.
Yeah, he told Sean Hannity straight to his face, "You are bad for America."
Yeah. Well, doesn't Sean Hannity say that to himself in the mirror every night?
Probably, as he cries himself to sleep. I'm kidding. We're apolitical at this podcast.
The thing about Ted Koppel, have you read his book?
No.
Lights Out. So Ted Koppel writes this book, Lights Out, that a cyber attack can take down the American grid for like months, not even weeks, like 3 months. And it turns out Ted Koppel, big prepper.
Nice.
In his like house in Connecticut or whatever, he can live there apparently for 3 months on like caviar and canned tuna fish or something.
If I had his money though, I would probably do that too.
Would you?
Yeah.
But the thing that I thought about two things. Think about cyber as a future threat. Okay, number one, and this was in one of the testimonies for the future FEMA stuff, the Stafford Act right now isn't clear about cyber threats. So we know it doesn't cover public health threats, and I want it to. Like, I want you to declare disaster for pandemics, but it's not clear about cyber. So if a cyber attack does take down the American grid, I'm not sure that's covered by a Stafford Act disaster declaration.
But are blackouts covered? Like, isn't that a blackout?
It's supposed to be for natural disasters. So what's an act of God, right?
Yeah.
Is the Russian hacker God? I hope the Russian hacker isn't God.
That's
that would
scary.
Really upset my theology if that's what was going on there. And the other thing is we are so dependent on information now. So if a cyber attack takes out our capabilities, like, we are screwed.
Yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. Our response is screwed.
I mean, just think of growing up before GPS, when we used maps and would have to like pull over and look at a map if you got lost. And now, when I'm driving, I just go exactly to what the GPS tells me. If that went away.
I was driving my 2-year-old today in the car, and she was like, can we listen to the Teddy Bear song? And I was like, no. And she was like, why not? And I was like, because you have to listen to the radio. You have to turn it to this number and listen to whatever it says. And she was like, but can I say, Alexa, play the Teddy Bear song? And I was like, no.
Alexa's in here now.
She was like, when I get home, I'm saying, Alexa, play the Teddy Bear song. All right.
So the last thing.
Oh, yeah. I want to talk about sunspots.
Sunspots, let's do it.
Okay.
Are these the spots on your skin that get like brown and
that's right.
as you age?
Those are are those called sunspots?
I think they're called sunspots.
Are those lesions?
I thought skin spots.
Okay.
First, but maybe I think it is sunspots.
Carcosi-sarcoma lesions.
Yeah.
So sunspots. So I was in DC and I saw this terrifying presentation about sunspots as a future threat, as a real threat to be. And it turns out in 1921 and in 1859, the famous Carrington event.
Sure. Yeah.
That I know we talk about that all the time. Right. There was a set of solar storms that were so intense that the idea is that now they would would knock out power to 250 million Americans and destabilize the electrical grid infrastructure for like massive amounts of time.
Wow.
And it would just take us out.
How does it disrupt? You may not know this, but
I really
because I
don't
thought
know.
power production, especially like coal fire plants, were pretty analog. I wouldn't think that radiation from the sun, which is what sunspots are, right? Would
This is what I think. It's something like an EMP.
Okay.
So it wouldn't take out the coal generation, but it would go into the substation. So the electromagnetic energy would go into the wires, and then it would go back in and it would blow out the substation. So you would have to rebuild the substations.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So that's why I think cogeneration, this idea that a hospital or a facility has its own generation system with solar power or maybe its own backup generation, is so important for the future.
Yeah. You think a place like New York City where most people live in apartments or, multifamily buildings, you don't have a generator. Like even if you bought one, you can't run it because you don't have a backyard. And just think about the number of people here who would be impacted by power loss.
But I was reading about a new startup in Brooklyn, because there's a startup for everything in Brooklyn,
right.
which is about solar power.
Huh.
And it has a new set of high-rises in Brooklyn that are, I'm awkwardly trying to take a beer out while I'm telling a story, so we're going to see how this works, is about solar power on high-rises. And what they're doing is they got a New York State power agreement that if their solar panels would feed back into the grid, to the New York State grid. So I do think that this microgrid idea is going to grow, that in the future there's going to be a lot more self-sufficient sort of grid members out there.
Yeah, and you're already seeing that. I even have some stuff in my go bag that's like solar powered, radio, phone charger, emergency light.
Right.
That's solar powered. So I think, I do think you're seeing more and more of that.
The other threat, talking about future threats that I really want to take a second on is, and it's depressing, but the rash of attacks that we're seeing, the truck attacks, the one at the British Parliament, the one in France, the terrorist things that we're seeing coupled with the rise in immigration starts to look, and these kind of ongoing violent things starts to look like a complex humanitarian emergency framework. So that's the framework the UN uses in military situations where you have a drought coupled with military action at the same time.
Right.
So my worry about the future is something like it's 30 years from now when New York City is supposed to have the same climate as Birmingham, Alabama, and you're having storms coming in along with a rise in domestic violence at the same time. And you really have this overlap of security and emergency management things happening.
Yeah.
And we have to be ready, I think, to be able to deal with multiple threats emerging at the same time, which is a capability we don't really have right now.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. Especially domestic emergency management programs.
Yeah.
I mean, you may learn about complex emergencies, one segment in one semester, right. About a faraway place that has to deal with this, but you don't think about it in the context of the United States. That's exactly right. That could be something in the future. The other interesting thing is that a lot of energy and money goes into preparing for these big major catastrophic emergencies, an anthrax attack, a nuclear detonation, but like we're seeing the terrorists just go rent a car, rent a truck, and drive it through a barricade. These kind of low-tech emergencies. So,
the other thing to hit on that, and I think this is more hopeful, because it's good to close with something hopeful, right? We're like, no, we don't believe in that in this podcast. But, because the other thing we were going to talk about is the use of the community, right, and local integration. I say so maybe you should whack me if I say Have you said I mean? Crap,
no, I haven't.
Forgot. Okay, it's good you're being honest. But oh crap, that hurt. Damn it. There's this guy. Shit. I know I'm being much worse than you are.
See, it causes you to slow down and think about each word, which is bad radio too. So you just can't win.
I'm going to be so slow now. Tony Surma is the director of disaster response at Microsoft. And he has been working on this program that is about connecting neighbors to neighbors in emergency response. So if you're a prepper out there and you're listening from prepper culture and you own a bunker in a former nuclear silo, or you have this cave in Tennessee that you really love, my argument is that that's not going to help you after disaster because you've got to build a community. And so what Tony has been working on are ways to connect people to other people. So build systems that after a disaster, you can communicate with your neighbors, you can share resources. So one of you's got 72 gallons of water, one of you doesn't have any. How do you connect that stuff? And I really think that's the next frontier of emergency management.
Yeah.
So in the Strategic Foresight Initiative that Craig Fugate commissioned at FEMA, it says that in 20 years, it's probable that this whole thing about barriers between volunteers and quote-unquote professional emergency managers is going to be gone.
Yeah.
And in emergency, we're going to be much more willing to bring volunteers in, to use new people out of communities to make a response that really bridges the government, the private sector, and local communities.
Yeah, I think he's exactly right on that. I mean, you see that today, even in like these local organizations, like in New York, you have the Red Hook Initiative.
Yeah.
You have faith-based programs that get out, get into the communities that a diverse group of people are a part of. And a lot of times they do more in emergency response than some of the emergency response agencies. I think he's exactly right. You pour into those, you equip those, and they will make a community, more resilient.
Yeah, I was going to close with something hopeful, but then I thought of the other threat we hadn't talked about, which is climate change and the crumbling infrastructure
Myth.
we have
Fake news
in this country. And it could be climate change is a myth, but even if it is a myth,
well, I think pretty much everyone agrees the climate is changing, right? People just disagree on what's causing it, or if man-made things are causing it to the degree that other groups say, right? I haven't heard anybody say the climate's not changing.
Did you read that the Great Barrier Reef is like mostly
Dying?
dead now?
Yeah.
I mean, now I'm saying I mean. Do you see how you just handed that off to me?
Sorry.
I'm just going to say human-made climate change. I don't want to be gender, I don't want to say man-made because let's just,
Human-made?
That's right.
Man and woman.
But I think that
it's the women's fault too.
Because we have this combination of crumbling infrastructure and rapidly changing climate, that set of threats, that whole from coastal storms to heat waves, is going to be even sort of bigger and worse than we're thinking it is now in the next 20 or 30 years. Because at some point it's going to tip and we're going to enter a constant threat scenario that's going to last a couple of decades until the resiliency of the country kind of balances it out.
Yeah, and I think the challenge there for emergency managers is to keep that long-term perspective in mind.
That's right.
So when you're deciding on funding for infrastructure, when you're deciding on plans and training and exercises, think, not 2 years down the road, but think what's going to make my organization more resilient 10, 20, 30, 50 years down the road. The other point on preppers, which is funny, is that under the Obama administration, you had this surge in kind of right-wing preppers or preppers in more conservative states really kind of preparing for the end of the world. And now what you have is the opposite. You have more liberal parts of the countries like in Silicon Valley, San Jose, these very rich, kind of more liberal people buying bunkers and creating bunkers and food. It's kind of interesting. You see the swing back.
My dad was like, I bet you Northerners think John Calhoun is pretty good now because states' rights. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but that's right. I'm turning into a left-wing prepper. I feel that happening to me right now.
What does this mean? Point of no return.
That's our fail-safe point. Up until there, we still have enough time to stop the locomotive before it plunges into the ravine. But once we pass this windmill, it's the future or bust.
That's great. God,
That's
what a
awesome.
great movie.
Yeah, right?
All right, so we don't have a guest tonight, so you get to do the lightning round.
Oh, good. I'm totally prepared for this.
Music for the lightning round? I don't remember.
I'll just figure some out. Hold on. Sorry, that wasn't music, was it?
No, that's great. That's close enough.
Okay.
Oh my God! It's a lightning round.
I'm not gonna know the answers to these questions.
All right,
I'm not going to
Mitch,
know the answers
so
to these questions.
are you ready? What's your favorite hazard?
Volcanoes.
What's the hazard that scares you the most? Volcanoes.
No, I'm not going to say volcanoes.
Yeah, you can't
again.
say the same thing.
No, I'm going to say what scares me the most. The thing that scares me. This is going to be such a dorky answer. Is the sweating sickness.
Failure.
No, it's a real. Yes, that's right.
The sweating
sickness from London in like the 16th century.
I don't know about this.
It's this disease, nobody knows what it is, but that people would wake up in the morning and they would feel okay, and then they would start like sweating in mid-afternoon, and then they would be dead.
Oh my gosh.
And it was really contagious. And so families would just die from sweating, and they couldn't figure out what it was.
Wow.
So but it's terrifying to me because I don't know. I don't
it's terrifying. What if something like that comes back? Like, I just feel like that's why viruses scare me.
Can I just say, because we didn't cover this in the future threats, there's another pandemic coming, right? And that pandemic is going to put past pandemics to shame, and it's going to be like CRISPR and all these biotech. We could do a whole episode on this. It's good. We're going to have Michael Osterholm on, and then we're going to talk about pandemics and how they'll kill us all.
And plus, you have the like antibiotic resistant stuff out there now that like if antibiotics fail, he actually said in this lecture I watched that he thinks that we will soon enter the post antibiotic era, which will not look different from the pre-antibiotic era.
I think
which
that's
is
right.
Terrifying.
Mm-hmm. And the thing is that because we won't have medications, New York City used to have a whole island of quarantine. Like there was a whole quarantine hospital. Typhoid Mary was there. Right, people went over there. We're going to need those capabilities again in the future. Within our careers, we're going to need those.
Well, good thing we live on an island.
Right, that's right.
Anyway, what's the first disaster you remember? Not the first one you responded to, but the first disaster you remember.
Not the first one I worked on. Okay. Does the Challenger explosion count?
Yeah, that's funny. That's mine.
Well, that's like...
I love you, man. We're so similar.
I like you.
No, that's cool.
No,
you could like me.
I love you. I mean...
okay, so what's the first disaster you worked?
Okay, so... You know what's interesting is the first disaster I actually worked was the flooding of the Flint River in southwest Georgia in 1993, which people don't remember. But I was in high school, and I remember going down to visit my grandparents and spending my break, and instead of like breaking, we went and we mucked out of school, and we worked on, cleaning up the neighborhood. And it stuck with me as something that was important. So I do think that I did that with my family. People did it with church groups. I'm worried that not enough like kids these days, right, growing up, are having that kind of service opportunity in emergency response, and I think it's really important to have that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That'll preach. That's my.
That's good. Preach it. What's your dream emergency management job? What would you, if you didn't have to have money?
I just want to follow in Craig Fugate's footsteps.
Really? You want to be FEMA administrator?
Absolutely. That would be my dream job.
That's be a good one. Favorite disaster movie?
No, that's hard. You know what it is? I'll tell you this. It is the first, the Battlestar Galactica miniseries.
Oh, really?
I think that the first, I don't know how long that miniseries was.
4 seasons?
But the first 3 or 4 episodes, like whatever that first movie length was, where the planets explode and then the ship leaves and all that sci-fi stuff, and where they're going through how they transition from living on all these planets to living on this one ship, is really good in terms of emergency management and how people cope with disasters. I think that's really important.
Best ICS, Incident Command System position.
Planning Section Chief.
No,
I love it.
You gotta be kidding.
No, I really do.
That's the worst.
It is like, I love it.
It's the hardest. It's the worst.
It's my favorite. It really is.
It's dumb.
I'm just kidding. I've often thought that.
No, that's great. Worst ICS.
I like how Andrew's like, this is stupid. The worst ICS. Documentation unit leader.
That's
it really
that's a rough one.
It's tough,
especially if you care about the environment. That's a rough one.
Yeah, you're making or if you care about megabytes on a computer, you're just filling.
Just the amount of information that comes at you in an emergency, and then to record all that. Oh, God.
It's just not even possible.
Best emergency management acronym.
Oh,
yeah, that's a kind of random.
Yeah, there are too many of them.
We can skip that one.
Okay.
Favorite emergency management gear.
Oh.
Piece of gear, of swag.
You know what? One time there was a university in Florida, and it put out swag that was a flip pen with a compass in it. It was like the most useless piece of gear
flip
ever.
pen?
It was like one of those pens, you pushed a button on the side and the pen sort of flipped out.
Oh, yeah.
And then when it flipped out, there was a compass there.
Oh.
But you didn't see the compass until the pen flipped out. And it was like, really? I'm going to write something and take a direction at the same time? So that's my favorite gear.
That's great.
I'm gonna play a different music cue because that was really
There we go.
That's better. We need a little groove.
So unfortunately, my the battery on my camera died, so our Facebook Live video ended about 20 minutes ago.
That's right, because we had like hundreds of people watching.
Yeah, it's okay. I think we had one viewer, and that might have been me watching myself this whole time. So that's it. We still have a phone number that you can call. Mm-hmm. Most people seem to email us, and we're backed up on the emails. So if you've emailed and we haven't responded back, we love you. We've read it, and we will respond shortly.
That's right.
We actually have a good slate of guests coming up, so I'm excited about kind of the next few months. We'll try to do these once a month, and we've got some good guests lined up.
And I do think emergency management in the next year is going to go through some exciting stuff, right?
Yeah.
We're going to set new capabilities. We're going to get new guidance. We're going to lay down a lot of stuff that's going to prepare us for the future we've been talking about. So it's going to be a good ride. I think.
The future is bright. Also, let's give a plug up to our boy Jeff Schlegel-Milch, who is starting a new emergency management podcast called Disaster Politics. So you can search for that on Twitter.
That's
They
right.
have a Twitter feed. They haven't released any episodes yet, but I think it's going to be a great emergency management podcast.
That's
We're
right.
all for him.
This
He's
is
great.
the Columbia University National Center for Disaster Preparedness. He's going to be a guest on one of our upcoming podcasts,
Yeah.
so we'll tease some of the stuff he's going to do.
And he's
then.
great, and that's great. We need more emergency management podcasts. It's a huge area, so...
Do we really? I feel like we've got this covered. You don't think so?
That's true. We do cover every angle of every issue. So email us, follow us on Twitter, send us questions, tell us if you want to be a guest.
And if you can think of a way for us to shock each other when we do our verbal tics.
Yeah.
Did you say I mean? I didn't
No,
get you hit
I
you.
haven't.
You've hit me like half a dozen times.
Yeah, I've cured myself of that.
We didn't even talk about improvised nuclear devices.
How do we talk about future threats when we haven't talked about INDs?
Drone carried INDs.
Rumor tracking. We forgot to talk about rumor tracking.
I'll tell somebody you said it on Twitter.